The Lord of the Rings, Fate of the Fellowship, a pandemic system game is a bit of a mouthful, but it's also kind of an interesting full circle that bears examination beyond just being a cool new cooperative Middle-earth game. See, for a lot of people, Matt Leacock's Pandemic and shortly thereafter Forbidden Island was their introduction to cooperative gaming, period, both enjoying widespread success as well as numerous spin-offs. Though you can attribute a lot of the still growing popularity of cooperative gaming to these two pillars, it was actually Reiner Knizia's The Lord of the Rings, published in the US by Fantasy Flight Games, that was the first cooperative game to really make headway in the hobby, which, according to Leacock himself, in an interview on this very channel, well, the podcast arm of this channel, served as direct inspiration for Pandemic.
I played Reiner Knizia's Lord of the Rings shortly after it came out, probably around 2000, 2001. And that really showed me that cooperative games could be a thing.
So here we are, all these years later, and Matt Leacock is doing a cooperative Lord of the Rings game with Z-Man Games, which is under the umbrella of Asmodee North America, which is formerly known as Fantasy Flight Games. And this is the third Pandemic system game following Wrath of the Lich King and the Clone Wars, both of which we've covered on this channel, but this is the first one in that series that Leacock has designed himself. Like I said, full circle. While there are definitely marks of its lineage, Fate of the Fellowship is the biggest departure from the Pandemic formula in this series yet, and you do yourself a grave strategic injustice if you rely on well-honed instincts of yore. Across Middle-earth, a clockwork war is raging, where each turn, enemy forces scheme and march following battle lines dictated by shadow cards drawn at an accelerated pace as the game goes on. These forces, if left unopposed, will crush the free peoples of the West, representing armies of elves, dwarves, and the men of Gondor and Rohan. If they reach havens and overcome any opposition, it becomes a new stronghold and the hope of victory depletes, a hope resting on a few banded by fellowship. Marking another large departure from most co-ops in the past, each player takes on the role of two characters, each with their own unique powers and a pawn on the board, and each turn you take up to 4 actions with one and 1 with the other, which does feel strange at first, but given the expanse needed to be covered and the heavy emphasis on tactical gameplay, is quickly apparent how welcome it is. Your character conducts the heroic deeds needed to delay and defeat the shadow before hope runs out, largely by mustering, escorting, and leading troops to battle, or otherwise work as roadblocks in the battle lines, and completing the objectives selected thematically or randomized for your game, pulled from an enormous stack of story beats with tons of possibilities. Some focusing on the accrual of resources, some about leading troops to assault a shadow stronghold to convert it to a haven, restoring some hope in the process, some about fortifying specific regions, but ultimately always ending with Frodo having to reach and spend 5 rings, then survive a final search at great peril at Mount Doom. Okay, so there's a lot to take in here. This is easily the most complex and richly strategic game associated with Pandemic that I've ever played, the sum total of legacy complexity aside. But it is woven together in a way that makes it really digestible. It's great. The actions themselves are really simple. Movement, share cards associated with your region, use cards for their resource, or cache those cards at havens for resource tokens which can be used in the same way, but don't eat up your hand, or escort troops around to pick fights with the shadow, rolling up to 3 dice and inflicting hits and suffering casualties accordingly. But between the automation of the marching armies of Mordor deployed and handled through a really cool system where you flip a shadow card and the new on-deck card either has a red banner indicating that the now revealed card resolves its march along its colored path, or Black Banner and you resolve the dark machinations on the bottom. But between contending with those forces, you also have the conflicting needs of the unique quests that you set up during any given game, and the special role of the player who controls the Frodo and Sam character, who can do the same thing and may have to do some of the same things that any other character can do, but ultimately is going to need to draw into 5 ring cards and or ring tokens and then haul their butt over to Mount Doom. So you got a lot of competing strategic priorities you're going to have to juggle. This is where Fate of the Fellowship sings, the thematic resonance of mounting pressure as you harness the disparate mechanics, echoing harrowing and beloved moments from Tolkien's story. And make no mistake, this is an absolute love letter to the written Lord of the Rings, with fine details, quotes, and allusions, from the player cards each featuring numerical flavor, also used to designate starting player, to things like one of Legolas's special abilities to shoo neighboring Nazgul, and Éowyn bearing one of the only ways to fully remove them from the board, but it goes beyond just representative powers. See, many consequences of shadow plotting are based on what region Sauron's eye is at, usually bad if hanging out with Frodo, though any time a player initiates a battle, that eye is moved, proving a valuable distraction. A major element of this game is that under a few shadow-driven circumstances, and any time the Frodo and Sam player moves, even if by escort from other players, unless the moving player discards a cloak resource, a search is conducted, rolling black dice equal to the enemy armies on the new location and Nazgul looming in their region, losing hope, potentially a lot of hope if not shielded from some results from being in a haven in the process. As a huge Tolkien geek, I mean, I've done freaking poetry readings on this channel, I love the distinction and separation, though direct relationship, between the martial combatants, the perhaps too tiny of wooden figures making up the various armies, and the individuals, the Nazgul and the heroic pawns that are leading the armies and conducting the various events that drive the narrative that we all love. Which there are a lot of Middle-earth games, including notable titles like the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game and Duel for Middle-earth having just come out last year, not to mention icons of this hobby like War of the Ring and the Knizia Lord of the Rings that I mentioned at the beginning of the video in the first place. And yet, with just a few plays in, I can already say that this is a contender for one of my favorites. It captures the splendor and scope of a game like War of the Ring, though trades in the grand strategy for automated co-op, with adventurous questing and the spreading hand of Sauron that harkens back to the now nearly forgotten Middle-earth quest. If I have any major criticisms, it's in the duality of the production. I mean, you got your absolutely lovely and surprisingly sturdy Barad-dûr, which, yes, collapses into 3 parts easily and fits all back in the box, but at the same time, you got a dizzying board with numerous colored paths to follow and tiny, tiny, tiny wooden figures, not to mention the Nazgul, which are beautifully sculpted and smartly on different elevations in their stands, so that way they're not bumping into one another, but nonetheless, as you're scooting them around the board, will inevitably fall, possibly knocking some pieces over. That, and no matter how good certain characters are at freely generating resources or mustering troops at affiliated locations with no cost, it does have the ability towards the end of the game to fall into the old pandemic trap where you have no good actions other than just how to best survive long enough to draw into the right cards, because my man Frodo needs 5 flip-flopping rings in order to cast that thing into Mount Doom. Of course, that's somewhat mitigatable if the Frodo player is thinking about the endgame right from turn 1, which is what you're going to need to do because this game is particularly hard. I just wish that there was another proactive layer lore that was built into the game, not specific to certain characters, maybe unique actions tied to capitals or certain havens. But on the other hand, the immense despair and weight of unassailable evil is a big part of the thematic conceit of the Lord of the Rings. So with all that said, I was dubious about this one, both in my love of Tolkien and the abundance of pandemic games and just games that use Middle-earth as set dressing. But Lord of the Rings Pandemic, this is not. Fate of the Fellowship is the real deal. A completely unique, complex, richly thematic, cooperative banger. That's also a love letter to the past. And that's our review, but let me know, what is your favorite Middle-earth game? I think I've asked that question in the past, so bonus question, what is your favorite Middle-earth character? Put it in the comments as always. Thanks for watching, thanks for supporting, thanks for being such an awesome community. You know that I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald.